Yes, perhaps you should.
What the?
Blanche? Oh, Blanche! Oh, murder! Murder!
What happened?
Dead! He's dead! Like Mr. Hall! He's dead! He's dead! He's in the...
What?
Oh, it was horrible! Horrible! I saw him! He was...
Hello, everyone. Sorry I'm late. You got my message about the flat tire? Well, don't all look so pleased to see me. What's up? Somebody died?
So, property developer Mr. Hall has been found dead. And all the evidence points to these 6 murder suspects. There are the murder suspects, the 6 weapons, and don't forget, there are 6 rooms at Arlington Grange. The drawing room, the study, the kitchen, the dining room, the billiard room, and the library. And these together provide the clues to the brutal murder. Now, detectives are ready to interview the suspects, but first, to decide who begins, John and Judy, a test for your powers of observation. Why was Colonel Mustard? He was late for the meeting. Why?
Well, because he'd telephoned that he had a flat tire.
Correct. Okay, you now have the right to ask the suspects 3 questions and then make a deduction. But before you start, there's one final point. 5 of these suspects here will be telling the truth. Only the murderer can lie. So your first question, please, and to whom?
Yes.
Right. Yes, I'd like to ask Professor Plum. When Mr. Hall was talking to you about was talking generally about the price, he started off a sentence. He said, "I thought you had more sense than this. I bought the land fair and square, didn't I, Professor?" Can you tell me what involvement you had with the sale of that?
Mr. Bellini,
I think it's a valid question.
I don't
Professor
see
Plum.
what my financial dealings have to do with the murder investigation.
We do have a murder on our hands, though. I think keep it brief, but please, they have a right to the answer.
All right, I sold Mr. Hall the land.
Very
and
briefly.
as a result of selling him the land, I realized what I brought on this
ruined the
community,
village.
and I was trying to help out.
He was trying to help out later. Okay, your second question, please.
The second question is to Miss Scarlett. Mr. Hall, the deceased, knew your name. He knew your first name, Vivian.
Right, well, I may as well come clean about my murky past. I had an affair with Mr. Hall.
Now that one.
Is there anyone that you haven't had an
Let her finish, please.
You, and I wouldn't dream of it either.
Let Professor Plum, please.
Right.
There's one more question, then a deduction.
Okay, it's to Mrs. White. Can I ask you what you took out of the cupboard in the kitchen when you were making the tea?
Oh, yes, certainly. I'd forgotten the sugar.
Your answer. I think that's your answer. Please, a deduction.
Yeah, okay. We'll have a first run at it, and my partner here is going to be the voice of us both.
Okay, we think it was Mrs. White with the statuette in the kitchen.
Mrs. White with the statuette in the kitchen. Well, I can tell you were right on one of those assumptions. One of those assumptions only. So we'll move over now to Anna and David. Your first of 3 questions, please, and to whom?
I'd like to ask the Reverend, why are you really so afraid about what will happen when the pond is drained?
My great love is environmentalism. In fact, it's probably better explained if I just tell you a brief love
Very
of the
briefly, Reverend
genus...
Green, very briefly, please.
Moles, save the moles, is my great love.
That was the answer. He was
Save the moles.
environmentally concerned. Your second question, please.
Environmentalism, basically.
Why was that heavy significance from Hall, the deceased, when he said to you, "Are you vegetarian now?"
I think he was actually just being rather nasty. As my friends will tell you, I've been vegetarian since I came to the parish 10 years ago.
Yes.
Ardently so.
Right. So that's a red herring.
So
or
to
a red
speak.
mole.
Except I wouldn't eat a red herring.
Third and final question, then your deduction, please.
I'd like to ask Mike Mustard, how could an SAS man have a car that has a flat tire?
English roads, really. I mean, you just can't trust them at all. It happens to anyone.
Even a soldier. A deduction, please, now.
You say your version.
David Weeks.
I think it was the Reverend because you can't get moles under lakes.
Oh, no, really, that is so stupid.
With what
He
weapon?
did it.
Nobody takes me serious.
He did it in the withdrawing room,
With what weapon?
and he did it with the knotted pole.
So you're saying it was Reverend Green with the curtain tie-back in the drawing room.
In the drawing room.
Well, I can say that you are wrong on all three of those assumptions, so we can exonerate the Reverend Green and indeed eliminate those three elements from our inquiries. So, there you have it at the moment. Two sets of deductions, both a little bit wide of the mark. But before we proceed, I'd like to put that same evidence to our grand jury here, to the 300 members of our studio audience. Now, you've seen the clues, you've heard the suspects, and indeed you've heard from the detectives. Now, what's your verdict? This is your chance to put your finger on the guilty party. So please make your decision now. And it's a pretty close-run vote at the moment. 1 in 3 of you, 33% here in the studio, think that Miss Scarlett perpetrated the evil deed. By a narrow margin, though, 35% of you pointed the finger at Mrs. White.
Now, wait.
All will come, gentlemen, ladies, all will come clear. But I wonder, is that your view at home? We'll take a short recess now, a chance perhaps to compare notes before we find out who really murdered property developer Mr. Hall. So, a murdered property developer with, as we now know, 5 possible murder weapons in 5 rooms at Arlington Grange, and because the Reverend Green has now been eliminated, the certainty that one of 5 suspects could be the murderer. And at this moment, the finger of suspicion is pointing very clearly at Mrs. White. But before I invite our detective to make a fresh deduction, some fascinating new evidence for them to consider.
Pig. Utter pig. I'll show him. Oh, come on, answer your phone, can't you? Tell me you left it switched off again. Darling. Ben. Oh, Reverend, you startled me. I was just fixing myself a little snack.
Yes, I can see, yeah. Sorry to interrupt.
Fascinating. But to decide who has the chance to apply this new evidence first, Anna and David, here's a test for your powers of observation. Now, there's a knife rack there at the back of the kitchen. How many knives in it?
4.
There were 4, correct. So you can now go on to cross-examine the suspects. But because we're sort of nosing towards the truth now, we're going to give you just one question and then a deduction. So a question, please.
Professor Plum, if you had done the deal with Hall, the deceased, why did you have to go back to the car to check the papers? And what papers were they?
May I take this moment just to say that
Can we stick to the
I
point?
have so enjoyed you on your show.
Can we stick to the point?
The Bravo show. It was just great.
You
Every
are
time
under
I came over from
suspicion,
the States,
Professor Plum.
I so relished seeing that program.
I think you may take that as an avoidance.
No, I'd like to answer her question. I was just looking at the papers that had to do with the transaction that I've already acknowledged to everybody present that I was the one who sold the property to Mr. Hall. I thought I should look over those papers because I'm not looking for any litigation.
Professor Plum, thank you. Your deduction.
We think it's Professor Plum with the spanner in the kitchen.
You think it's Professor Plum with the spanner in the kitchen. I'm afraid you're wrong on all 3 of those assumptions, so they can all be eliminated from further inquiries here this evening. The advantage now comes back to John and Judy.
And I
Your
just want
question?
to say that I will never watch your show again.
Do sit down.
Well, I'm upset.
Be quiet.
Americans are very noisy people, are they not? Your question, please.
Yes, you
Miss
ask.
Scarlett, can I ask you who you were telephoning when you came downstairs to make yourself a sandwich?
I tried to telephone Mike. I needed a little bit of comfort because I was a little ashamed. But I thought he answered and it cut off, so I just took my
He
comfort
was
from
calling
sandwich.
Colonel Mustard. Your deduction, please.
We've decided then on a process of elimination that it's in fact Colonel Mustard with the knife in the billiard room.
Colonel Mustard with the knife in the billiard room. You're right on but one of those counts, I'm afraid. One. So the advantage comes back to Anna and David now, who must surely be near to the truth.
Do we have a question?
You can have a question, then a deduction.
Did you come into the house before we saw you come into the house?
Absolutely not. I just arrived. No, absolutely not. I just arrived. It takes time to mend a puncture.